All right, section 10.5 is called abuses of statistics. You guys ready? All right, abuses of statistics. And you have a table here, or kind of a list, of ways that you can abuse statistics. So I'm not giving you this so that you go and abuse people's statistics. I'm giving you this because as a consumer, and a consumer of information is what I was referring to, it's good to be aware of when somebody else is trying to abuse the statistics in their favor. All right? So we're going to go through these, jot some notes down on the sides as to how the statistics is being abused, and then you're going to work some problems today in groups that where you're going to identify the type of abuse that's being used, basically. All right, so the first issue is sampling process. So there's lots of ways that we can abuse how a questionnaire or how a sample is being created. The first issue is who was asked. Who was asked either the questions or asked to participate, whose measurements were being taken, whose whatever. So for instance, if you were taking a very concentrated number and trying to apply it to a whole grand large scale, it probably wouldn't be appropriate. So if I asked all of you in this room a question, and then I said, therefore, all OBU students, that's probably not appropriate. First of all, you're all female, right? Males might have a different opinion. The other thing is you're all in education, right? The pre-med people might have a different opinion. So there's something about who you're asking. Another question, how many are you asking? Well, there's only there's 17 of you here today. So if I ask 17 of you and then I apply it to the university at large, that's a problem as well. This university is quite large, at least in terms of larger than 17 people, right? So that's not very many people to then make a big, vast judgment about. How many responded? So let's say I send out a flyer in the mail and I send out 15,000 flyers and I have 12 people who respond. That's probably not very good, right? And the other issue is when you have the people responding in that way, are they responding because they strongly support or strongly don't support the cause, whatever it is that you're trying to research information about, right? So if you send them out all kinds of information about the presidential election and they are strongly in support of a particular candidate, they may be more apt to respond to you, whereas if they really don't like anybody who's running, they may not respond at all because they really don't care. Well, then you're not getting some sort of a sense of really what's going on with the larger population. How is this, or was the sample random? Okay, so if I take the information from you guys, this is not random. You are all sitting in my classroom right now. If I stand out on the campus and ask every person that comes out of the GC, I've got something at least that's a little bit more random, right? Because I haven't sort of isolated everybody in a particular location. How is the question worded? So if the question is worded so that it's confusing, that's not good. People may not even be knowing if they're answering yes or no too, because you asked the question in such a way that you had 3 negations in there or something like that. Like, I don't know, yes or no, or whatever. Did you ask 2 questions within the same question? Do you guys ever do that? With somebody you say, hey, what did you get on this answer and this answer? And they give you an answer and you're like, okay, was that the first one or the second one? That kind of thing. So if you ask a question in a way like that, or if you ask a question to which somebody is more inclined to say no when maybe the answer might be yes. For instance, did you go out partying last weekend? And you'd be like, well, I don't want to tell you that, and I don't want them to know, and maybe my parents will find out. So what do I say? So there's this sense of, moral rightness of who's asking the question and what you should be responding versus what you really are supposed to be responding. So there's some issues there, right? Okay, so these are sort of sampling issues. This is issues that can happen when you actually collect the information. So that's something that's legitimate to ask. I mean, like, was the sample actually a really valid sample? Was it really representative of what was really going on in that context? Here's the next issue. The next issue can come from, once you've collected the information, did you display it in a way that's appropriate? All right? So one issue is there a title? Some of you got back papers from me today graded that said title, question mark? Are there labels on the axes? Some of you got that too. Labels? Question mark? Because if there are not labels and you've just marked hash marks, what do those mean? Like for instance, the one that you were looking at where you were calculating the slope, and if it had not marked them, I would have been inclined to think that every one of those little boxes had unit length 1, and they were supposed to be unit length 1/2. That matters. Did you count by twos? Are you talking about days of the week or months of the year? And this is different stuff that it matters that those labels are on there. The source of the data is included. For instance, if you got the data out of a particular resource, or when you're creating your title or you're creating your axes, this is from this particular teacher's class, right? Where is this information coming from? If I take the information from Duke and then I try to say this is what's happening in Oklahoma, probably not going to be very accurate, right? So it matters where the information's coming from. If you've got a pictograph, it matters that you have a key. The same thing's true for a stem and leaf plot, right? It matters. What do those units, or what does that image represent? So when we did those deaths per people, the deaths people on the holiday weekend, whatever symbol was used, we used circles. When we used those circles represented 20 people, not one person. So we have to actually make sure that's included if we're going to represent it accurately. Uniform sizes of the symbols on a pictograph. So, and this is true actually for pictographs and histograms and all of the things, is that if it's 1 unit apart, it needs to look like the same length of a unit apart on the other values too. We talked about those when we were drawing these graphs. Remember me harping on that and saying, make sure that it looks like your spacing is approximately equal. Make sure that it looks like on the pictograph that your circles are all about the same size. Make sure when you're doing those dot plots with the little x's that it doesn't look like one x is twice the size of the other x's. Scale, does it start with 0? If it doesn't start with 0, we do that little break in the graph that we've talked about now. Kristen was asking questions about that a couple class periods ago. Those breaks in those graphs are important. There was a, man, it was probably 3 falls ago, there was data given at a faculty meeting at the very first of the year, and the incoming freshman ACT scores were lower than they were the year before. They weren't lower by a lot. They were lower by 0.4, all right? So let's use some numbers and let's just say they were 23.4 average one year, and then they were 23 average the next year, incoming ACT scores. Well, I mean, 0.4 doesn't sound like a lot, but if I draw it so that my scale starts at 23 and goes to 24, 0.4 looks like a lot. That's a big drop. So I need to be really accurate in how I'm representing that. If I'm not going to start at 0, I need to actually put that break in that graph. Scale, I already said. 2D and 3D misleading effects. So I want to show you one of those. If you have your book, it's easiest for me to show you from your book. Take a look at your book, section 10.5. And look at table, look at page 615, that'll work. Page 615, it's figure 10.4 or 10-41 and 10-42. Do you guys see that? There's boxes, orange and blue or orange and purplish. The first one is a 2-dimensionalized picture. And what they're trying to tell you is, I believe this one was the number of, the figure has a volume, oh, okay, on the page before, how many of something is sold. So the Corn Crisps in that picture, 8 million boxes were sold, and the Sugar Pops, 2 million boxes were sold. All right? Well, it looks like, if you look at the area picture, the 1041, it looks like that the Corn Crisps had a lot more than 4 times as many boxes sold. Because not only did they give height to what was going on, they gave width. Do you guys see that? Like if I took that little purple box and I put it inside of the orange box, I'd fit a bunch of those little in there. In fact, I'd fit 16 of them in there. So that picture actually is 16 times as big as the first picture, or the second picture. That's not what's going on, right? It's only 4 times as many, because there's 8 compared to 2 million boxes sold. And then if you want to make it even worse, let's 3-dimensionalize the silly thing, right? So you make it 3-dimensionalized, and now it isn't a 1-to-4 ratio, it's a 1-to-64 ratio. That's not what's going on. And so when you do things where you 3-dimensionalize or 2-dimensionalize the picture, that happens. If you take a look at the one below that, figure 10.3, they've done the same sort of thing over here with that pie graph. Do you see that pie graph? They've 3-dimensionalized it, right? I don't know about you, but 27% and 23% are very close values. But that green portion that looks like 27% looks about twice as big as the 23% lumber at the back. because they three-dimensionalized it instead of keeping it a two-dimensional flat surface. So we don't want to add any dimensions or things, or if we do see that added, we need to recognize, hey, wait a minute, something about this looks misleading. Okay? So here's the deal on your homework set. Group work homework, 10-5, A and B. The entire set is appropriate for communication and cooperative learning. It's all stuff that will be better served if you do it talking with someone. Because Morgan, you're going to see something about it that's different than Lynn's going to see. And by hearing the other person say, oh, you're going to be like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I wasn't even thinking that they misled me in that way. It happens all the time. So that's why this is sort of described in here in this way.